In this demonstration, you will learn how to use property triggers in a style. Let's switch to Visual Studio. Here I've started the Customers application. Now let's imagine that you want to give a text box a different background when it has the focus. You can do that with a property trigger. So let's keep the application running, and in Visual Studio, let's go here to the styles SAML file, in which you have defined here this implicit text box style. The style class has a triggers property to which you can add different triggers. There is a data trigger that works with data bindings, an event trigger that can start animations when an event occurs, and this property trigger that can react on property values. Then there is also a multi-property trigger to check multiple property values and a multi-data trigger to check multiple data values. The most common trigger is the property trigger. So let's use this one. It has a property, which means you can check the isFocus property of the checkbox. Let's check if it has the value true. And if that's the case, you can define now setters in this trigger. So I just copy here the setter of the background property and I paste it into the trigger. Of course, you can define here multiple setters inside of a trigger. Now let's change here the value from 555 to 111, which is nearly black. Now this means if the isFocus property is true, the background property is set to this value. If it is not true, that value from the style is used. Now let's bring up the application again. As you can see, the first name text box is dark because it has the focus. When you put the focus into the last name text box, that text box gets the dark background. Now let's keep the application running and let's go back to the SAML editor. If you want, you can specify multiple property triggers. So let me copy this one and let's specify another one for the isMouseOver property of the text box. If that's the case, let's set here the background property to green. Now the question is, what happens if both conditions are true? So both triggers get active. Then, if the later trigger sets the same property like here, it will overwrite the value of the previous trigger. This means in this case, if the mouse is over the text box, the background property will be green even when the text box has the focus. Now let's see this in action and let's bring up the application. Let's hover the first name text box that does not have the focus and you see it turns green. Let's hover the second one that has the focus and you see it turns green. Now let's go back to SAML and let's change here the order of the two triggers. I define the isMouseOver trigger before the isFocus trigger. This means if the text box is focused, the background property will have this value, no matter if the mouse is over it or not. Let's see this and let's bring up the application again. As you can see, the first name text box does not have the focus. So when you put the mouse over it, it turns green. The last name text box has the focus, so when you move the mouse over it, it does not turn green anymore, because the isFocus trigger is defined after the isMouseOver trigger. Now let's remove that isMouseOver trigger again from our triggers property, as we just want to make the text box a bit darker when it has the focus. Alright, so far to styles and triggers. Now let's wrap up what you have learned in this module.